What's something that still makes you uncontrollably angry? My son went through the worst thing imaginable for a child, and it all started with my stepdaughter Kara. I thought she was a great role model for my son, since she was someone who really seemed like she had her life together. She was class president, perfect GPA, and juggled sports on the side. But she was the one who put my son in a situation he couldn't even say no to, and I will never forget the day. It had been a normal weekend where everyone was sort of doing their own thing. I was busy cooking up lunch for the family while my wife was busy watching her favorite show, Desperate Housewives. My son was playing with his toys in the living room, and Kara was on her phone texting her friends. I finished cooking our meal and called everyone over. While we ate, Kara asked if she could go over to a friend's house, saying that she could bring along my son so that my wife and I could enjoy the afternoon to ourselves. She mentioned that the house was a few streets away but still in the same neighborhood, so I asked for the address before letting them go out to play. By around 5 p.m., I decided to head out and pick up my kids for dinner. It was an hour earlier than we had discussed, but I figured it would be all right. I took the car and parked on the cul-de-sac. As I walked up the driveway, my son suddenly sprinted out the door crying harder than he had ever cried before. He ran into my arms, and I bent down to immediately check his body to make sure all limbs were still attached. He was fine, at least physically, but he was covered in makeup and had lipstick stain marks all over his arms and legs. He was also covered in glitter and wearing a little girl's outfit. My son cried, saying over and over that he didn't want to be the princess anymore. I picked him up, furious, and screamed for my stepdaughter Kara, hoping that she would also be okay. She stepped out of the house without a scratch or mark on her. At the time, I was thankful, but I didn't realize that she was fine for another reason. I grabbed her wrist and hurried back to the car to keep them safe. I stood beside the car for a while and debated whether I should drive home already or check and see where the parents and friend were to squeeze an explanation out. I went with my gut and decided to take my kids home first. When I drove off their street, my son suddenly clenched his stomach painfully. I hit the brakes and turned around, driving straight to the hospital. I angrily asked Kara what had happened, but she remained silent. We eventually made it to the hospital, and I rushed my son into the ER, explaining that I had just picked my kids up from a playdate. Once my son was admitted, I asked the nurse to also check on Kara, just to be sure. They took her away to another room while I waited on a bench in the lobby. I sank my head in my hands, lost in thought when a doctor suddenly approached me to talk about my son. The doctor asked me several questions to confirm events, and asked to get permission to perform a more thorough test on his rear end. I broke down on the floor with my heart racing. I agreed to the test, and asked if they could also call the authorities for me to help with the situation. The doctors ran the test, and confirmed that there was bleeding, tissue scars, and DNA found. I rushed into the room and hugged my son closely, apologizing multiple times while tearing up and shaking. I felt so brokenhearted for my son. I forced myself to calm down after a moment, and asked my son for more details. He said, "I played toys with Sissy, and the man, he gave bad dress. I don't like the man. He's bad to me." I asked him who the bad man was, and he said, "The bad dad." The officers in the room wrote the statement, and got permission to speak to my daughter, who confirmed the facts. They sent out others to arrest the guy, but he had already fled to another state. They put out a warning but eventually arrested him after 2 weeks. I visited him once, just to clear things off my chest. He was still smug and confident, but he confessed that he wasn't actually the only one to do things to my son. I asked what he meant, and he told me that my stepdaughter Kara had a bigger role than I would ever know. There was no evidence, but his words really did get to me. Unfortunately, to protect my son, I had to move away from him. My wife came over once a week, but our family was broken beyond repair. We eventually filed for divorce to make things easier. Unfortunately, Kara is living freely without any consequences, but I'm afraid she might do worse things to others in the future.